Good morning, everyone. And following on from Jeff's guided tour of the medical training review, I think it's fairly clear that increased flexibility is a theme that we're going to see more and more in the future. And so, there are lots of components of the training ecosystem that could have a part in flexibility in training. And it seems right that we should consider how the college could contribute to flexibility in training for the pathology specialties. So I thought we'd begin by considering what flexibilities we currently have, and then move on to think about what might come in the future. And we'll stay focused on the part that the college might play in being flexible around pathology training, because there are lots of other agencies that have their part to play. So, to state the obvious, increasing flexibility within a regulated environment is always going to be challenging. Our freedom to be flexible is not without limits. There are parameters within which we have to work, and the regulations that we face mean that we can't do what we want when we want to. We've got to particularly follow the constraints imposed on us by other organisations, and these constraints are there, of course, for a very good reason, but it's clear that they're not entirely compatible with optimising flexibility. So you'll know, of course, that the GMC regulate us, and from the college's perspective, one of the main documents that we refer to is Excellence by Design, which sets out the standards and requirements of postgraduate medical curricula. And we've got to meet those and demonstrate that we meet those in all of our pathology curricula. And when we want to make changes to our curricula and our assessment systems, we've got to go through a process of approval. And you can see there that there's a document that we've got to follow whenever we want to make changes. And then, of course, there's the goal guide that I'm sure you're all very familiar with, and that gives us operational guidance. And clearly it's important that we as a college don't diverge from the goal guide. So we need to maintain alignment with the advice in the goal guide, and of course, as it changes, we will be able to change too. So that's the framework within which we've got to operate, and within which we've got to think about how we implement flexibilities. So what flexibilities do we have now? In 2017, the GMC published a document that indicated their willingness to embrace a degree of flexibility for postgraduate medical training. And a few years later, the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges published some guidance for flexibility in postgraduate training. And so these set out both current and potential future opportunities for increasing flexibility. So this topic has been discussed for quite a long time. Now, the Academy guidance has been more focused on allowing doctors to transfer between specialties and recognise competences achieved in one specialty when moving to another specialty. But it also deals with the idea of recognising learning and capabilities that are gained during periods out of training programs. So we've been thinking about that, and we've made some changes to the way we approach recognising those circumstances. Obviously, our 2021 curricula are very much focused on capability-based outcomes. So you'll all think about SIPs, our capabilities in practice, and so those are really what anchors our curricula. And inherent in focusing on outcomes is the opportunity to take a less concrete approach than we used to have to take when everything was about time served. And so we've got some items of guidance and some forms to keep us up to date with what you're doing that would facilitate some flexibility within current operational constraints. So where do you find that guidance? Well, if you go to the college website, and if you find the training section within the trainee page, and then you look down towards the bottom, you'll find a bit on guidance and forms for medical trainees. And there's an area in there entitled Bringing CCT Dates Forward. And within that, you'll see 3 sets of guidance that are relevant to flexibility and 3 gap analysis forms. So we'll come on to those in a few moments. But this morning, I'd just like to mention briefly the first 2 types of guidance that we have here, because many of you may not be familiar with them. They've only been out for about a year. The first is about recognising training and experience that's been gained by a doctor before entering a GMC approved training programme. And this is about thinking about and recognising the training and experience that a doctor might have gained either within the same specialty before entering a programme, or indeed in another specialty prior to entering a pathology programme that they might be able to transfer and bring with them and that we might be able to recognise. And that's very much a nod to the flexibility guidance from the Academy published in 2020 that I mentioned. So the focus here, as you might imagine, is very much on SIPs. It's very much on what outcomes have already been achieved and have these been clearly demonstrated. And it's effectively asking the question, has this doctor demonstrated that they've achieved something before entering training that would normally be expected to have been achieved during training? It's not determined by the time they've spent gaining experience outside the programme. It's very much focused on what capabilities they can demonstrate and evidence. So, as you might imagine, the evidence is really important. And for those doctors who have been able to maintain a contemporaneous portfolio of work, of learning encounters and of assessments, that makes life much easier when you want to recognise prior training and experience. Similarly, if a doctor has done some of our exams, that's really useful evidence as well. And that can be supplemented by the assessments that you'll undertake and that the trainee will seek during their time in the training programme. So you can put all this together and think, did this doctor come to training having already achieved some important capabilities that we would normally expect them to achieve in a programme? I think, reflecting on what Jeff has said, there's going to be a lot more of an emphasis on this, on creating opportunities for a doctor who's not in a training programme to gather that kind of evidence, to maintain a portfolio, to be exposed to learning encounters and to have the opportunity to document through assessment what capabilities they've achieved. So I think that as the system changes, it will make it easier for us to give credit and recognise this kind of training and experience. The next step, whenever we're in this situation, is to document the capabilities that the doctor has already achieved on a gap analysis form. And the idea of the gap analysis form is to focus the educational supervisor or the training program director on the impact that these capabilities have on the anticipated training time, and to kind of think through, well, if this doctor has already achieved these capabilities, roughly how much time is that equivalent to in a program? And if you're recognizing capabilities gained prior to entering the program, this needs to be addressed formally at the first ARCP. And it's at that point that the anticipated CCT date can be set or adjusted if supported by the postgraduate dean and their teams. So it's a case of the ARCP panel looking at the gap analysis form, thinking about the evidence and making a recommendation to bring forward the CCT. And our guidance would recommend that you can do that for up to 12 months. In other words, you can recognize up to 12 months of time in a program based on prior experience and learning that's evidenced through capabilities. Okay, so the other document that I wanted to highlight is the one that summarizes how to deal with accelerated progression through training programs. So first, this principle is already set out in the Gold Guide, so it's not new. And the point of our guidance is to provide some framework within which that can be approached consistently within pathology specialties. And it's really for those doctors in a program who have achieved curriculum capabilities at what would be regarded as an exceptional rate while in the program. And we've had lots of discussions at various committees and meetings about this, and there is a lot of focus on the word exceptional. It's really not something that's intended to be used for convenience. It's not something that's intended to be used when you're looking at a doctor who's good or very good, but we're asking, has this person progressed at a truly exceptional rate, such that they really don't need to spend the typical or indicative time in the training program? Once again, the focus is on SIPs, and the question here is, has this doctor demonstrated achievement of a SIP or a group of SIPs at a faster rate than is typically expected? And does the collective effect of this exceptional progression against all of the SIPs in their curriculum justify shortening their training time. So a bit like the previous set of guidance, this is underpinned by review of evidence, and that focuses on capabilities achieved and is, I think, much easier than recognizing capabilities from prior to a training program, because when a doctor is in a program, they're going to be using the portfolio, they're going to have documented a lot of their learning encounters, they're going to have evidence of assessments, and you'll be able to look at their exam findings, and it's a lot easier to find the evidence that you need, or have access to the evidence that you need to be able to make a decision. And then, as before, if the educational supervisor or TPD documents those capabilities on the relevant gap analysis form, and here you're really thinking about, has this doctor reached an entrustment level that is much higher than you would expect for their current stage of training? And if so, could you then estimate the training time that's needed to get them from where they are to the end of training with the entrustment level that they need to achieve for all of their SIPs at the end of training? So in contrast with the first procedure, the time for making this decision, or the last time for making this decision, is at the penultimate ARCP. It can be done beforehand, although I'd imagine that it wouldn't be easy to do it beforehand. And if supported by the ARCP panel, the anticipated CCT date can be reset. And likewise, it requires the support of the postgraduate dean and their teams. And again, it's possible to bring forward a CCT date by up to 12 months with this in mind. But again, we're thinking very much about exceptionality, and 12 months is quite a long time. So it's not by any means implicit that a doctor who thinks they could have their CCT accelerated would have it accelerated, or indeed by the whole 12 months. So for those of you who have not yet needed to look at the gap analysis form, this is what it looks like. It's in 3 sections. The first section deals with the generic SIPs, and it asks the question, is there evidence to assess the doctor against this capability? And approximately where do you think they are in terms of training year for this capability? So this is the SIP about functioning within the NHS management systems, and it's a chemical pathology form. That's why it starts at ST3. So this requires the ES to think about where the trainee is for this SIP at this point in time. They then do the same thing for the specialty SIPs. This is SIP 7, which is about leading and managing a laboratory. And the question here is, what is the doctor's current entrustment level for this SIP? And there's space for providing some explanation or justification of that. And when you've gone through sections 1 and 2, you then come to section 3, which is about pulling it all together and saying, okay, you've thought about what level of achievement the doctor has demonstrated, and you know where they need to be at the end of training. So how much training time is needed from this point to reach the end of training? And from there, you can make a decision as to whether it is practical and sensible to revise the CCT date at that point. So in summary, we've got recognition of prior training before entering a program and exceptional progression to accelerate doctors through programs. They have some features in common, but the main difference is that recognizing prior training must be dealt with at the first ARCP, whereas exceptional progression, accelerating a doctor through a program, is a decision that must be taken at the latest by the penultimate ARCP. Okay, so that's kind of a summary of the flexibilities that we have at present, and I think it's worth keeping those in mind. We as a college have consulted with our lead deans, and they're very happy with those arrangements, and the GMC has agreed that our guidance is appropriate as well. So we're confident that we've got a system that allows some degree of flexibility that is proportionate. But looking to the future, what flexibilities might we have? I think it's fair to say that, in order to have further flexibilities, we need to see regulatory and procedural changes. And that relies on the GMC, it relies on COPMED. Essentially, we can only enhance flexibility if our environment, our regulatory environment, becomes more flexible and enables a certain agility. But it's not all about what others can do. I mean, there are things that we as a college can do to enable changes to our training. For us, that means thinking about our curricula. And within the sort of past few years, we have participated in a quality assessment review of our chemical pathology curriculum as part of the GMC pilot. And that has enabled us to look at and think about what has gone well and what we need to consider about the application of our chemical pathology curriculum. And I know that Benita is going to talk to those of you who are chemical pathologists in a bit more detail about that later on. And we're now undertaking a review of our other curricula. So we're undertaking a review of our cellular pathology curricula and our infection curricula. So that gives us an opportunity to prepare for the changes that are likely to happen or that we can foresee in medical training in the future. So just to gaze the crystal ball and think about what might come. Well, I think importantly, we need to rely on our regulators thinking about the speed at which we can make changes. I would really like to see the GMC allow us to be a bit more agile when we want to make changes to our curricula. I think that, at present, the Gold Guide allows us to recognize training that's occurred while out of program in OOP-T and OOP-R, but actually there's a huge amount of learning happens when a doctor is out of program on OOP-E. That's not currently provided for in the Gold Guide. So I'd like to see some increased recognition of that. And maybe in future we'll see, as Jeff has alluded to, a way of looking at more prolonged periods of experience outside programs and giving recognition for those as well. All of those doctors who work as locally employed doctors for many years before joining a program might have more than 1 year counted in future. And I think there are a number of possible changes to our curricula. So, for example, I think we would perhaps benefit from widening access to our training programs, either recognizing training or allowing for training in a greater range of specialties before entry, and increasing the number of entry points to some of our specialties, and perhaps thinking about the type of posts that need to have been completed by a doctor before entering our programs. So widening access should certainly be a theme as we reconsider our curricula. I think that when we build curricula, we need to think about how we can facilitate new posts and new programs. And that means reviewing the expectations of a day one consultant. And that means thinking about what really must be delivered within a training program and ensuring that we increase the deliverability of our curricula across a wider geographic spread. And I think we'll be progressively reducing the emphasis we have placed in training processes. So things like time spent in various specialties or subspecialty areas and the number of various things that people do. So the number of biopsies or the number of workplace-based assessments and so forth. I think we're perhaps going to need to be reconsidering that while recognizing that providing guidance in terms of number of events is actually very useful for trainers in particular and for doctors in training to have an idea about the volume of work that needs to be done to achieve the level of capability that we're aiming for. So in summary, I think we've got several current options for flexibility and pathology training. There is the opportunity for future enablers of flexibility, but we are dependent on our regulatory environment to be able to do that. Although there are things that will be within our control when that happens. And I can see Marta's happy smiling face on the screen, so I sense that I'm running over time. I'll say one more thing, and that is that I would really ask you to please engage with the curriculum revision process. The curricula are revised by our training program directors in deaneries across the UK. So if you have a view on this, please lobby your TPD and they will feed into the process. When the curricula have been drafted, there will be a consultation. Please engage with that consultation and respond to it because we want our curricula to reflect the views of all of our fellows and all of our trainers. So please do take every opportunity to shape our curriculum revision.